Welcome everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, June 20th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about a new revenue distribution idea for the revenue sharing that has been passed with the House resolution that came over about 2 months ago, but it looks like the football programs are going to get a big piece of the pie, so we'll get into that and some of the repercussions that could happen because of that. Then we'll get into Urban Meyer's comments about Ohio State, calling them maybe the most talented roster ever. Jim Tressel also kind of had those sentiments as well, so I kind of want to break down their roster and why I don't necessarily agree with them too hard. Then we'll get into two-way players. Travis Hunter obviously is an absolute star on the college football level because he can play both ways. Well, it sounds like a couple other guys are trying to follow in his footsteps, so I want to break those guys down for you today. Then we'll continue with our stock up, stock down segment. We'll get into the Big 12 today, give you two teams that I think might just be heading in the right direction, two teams that I don't think necessarily are heading in the right direction. Before we finish it off with a Hot Take Thursday, definitely a ton to get to, but the Hot Take Thursday will be about kind of a scheduling hiccup, I suppose you could add to the future of college football that I think would really improve the state of college football as of right now. But before we jump in, don't want to see that. Before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this new revenue distribution model that has been kind of thrown out there by a couple different entities. The person kind of overseeing this all is Judge Claudia Wilken. We talked about her a little bit last week. She oversees a ton of antitrust cases with NCAA athletics, but also just sports in general. So definitely a very qualified person to be overlooking this case. As we all know, the big question here is, how do you split up the revenue? How do you figure out how that, I believe it's $22 million is the top that you're allowed to pay, $20 million, you can go down from there kind of. But they're trying to figure out how to kind of disperse this among the athletic department, make sure that everyone gets at least a little bit of piece of the pie, but it's a very hard thing to figure out, frankly. One of the big-time ideas that was thrown out there, which frankly is a little bit interesting, is a little bit probably not ideal, I think, for a lot of people, but might just be where we're at as of right now, is 75% of the money would be heading towards football. There would be 5%, there would be 5% heading to women's basketball and all of the other sports, with 15% heading to men's basketball. So about 90% of this money would go to men's sports, those two men's sports to be more specific, and it's one of those things that you love to not be the case, right? It sounds like college football will likely get roughly 15 to 16 million. You'll have men's basketball get about 3 to 4, 3.5 maybe. Women's basketball around 1, and then everyone else, you'll have to split up that 1 million. So it's really fascinating because it's going to be a lot of money heading towards football and a lot of money heading towards men's basketball, which was likely the way that a lot of this was going to go. When you look at the way that the back pay is going to be paid to some of these athletes, the vast majority is to football and men's basketball players. So it's one of those things that it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. You want to use Title IX, and you want to be able to, for that to be able to apply to this, but the kind of harsh reality of all of this is you can't necessarily do that, because then there would be football players possibly down the road arguing we're not getting paid our fair share, which is a whole other antitrust lawsuit that they could get themselves into. So it would be in an ideal world, I'll put it this way. In an ideal world, I think I would split this 50-50. I think women's sports would get 50, men's sports would get 50, and then you would bridge the gap for men's sports through NIL, through collectives, whatever that looks like. But the reality is, it might just not be something that's just not possible. It might just be something that if they do it, you're opening yourself up to even more lawsuits and even more money going out the door and possibly even more financial troubles down the road. So it's one of those things that Title IX could apply, but it might not be in the best case scenario for everyone if it does. So it's a very interesting kind of thing to look at. And I think one of the big things here is obviously collectives will still be a thing. There will still be that competitive advantage over other schools because you want to be able to spend a little bit more money where you need to and do some of the things that some other schools aren't willing to do, aren't able to do, whatever that looks like. So I believe collectives are still going to be a big time part of this conversation when it comes to NIL and even revenue sharing and all of that type of stuff, player payment. So that's not necessarily going away. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this kind of rolls out over the next little bit, because there will be some people that are upset about this because of Title IX, and I fully understand that. I mean, Title IX has been a very incredible thing for college, college sports, and just college overall. It's been a really remarkable thing, not only for women but for men in college sports. But at the end of the day, if you can't do it without opening yourself up to even more problems in the future, I kind of understand where they're coming from. And the thing that I kind of want to zero in on here is there are a lot of athletic departments that are going to struggle to do this. Now, obviously, you can go below that $22 or $20 million moniker, so you can kind of spend as you see fit, but you're probably going to use that 75% to the football program, 15 to men's basketball, 5 to women's basketball, and then 5 split up among all the other sports like volleyball. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see what the numbers are for the different schools, but the reality is, whatever that number is across pretty much any school, it will definitely cause some problems for, competitive balance and things of that nature. But the reality is, for a lot of these athletic departments, there's something that they can put up. Now, it's not necessarily the same for everyone, and not everyone is going to be able to do the $22 million and have everyone make a ton of money and all of that type of thing. But all this is a little bit more money going in the way of college athletes, which is never a problem to me, frankly. I'll be totally honest. I don't necessarily love a lot of the different kind of mechanisms that are going on right now, but if all of this is above board and they're, making a little bit money for the work that they put in, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. Now, I think the issue does come in when you might have some people in the room that don't necessarily care too much about some of the smaller sports. They care more about turning a profit. They care more about, making as much money as they can off this athletic department. And that's one of the big reasons I'm worried about private equity is there's some people in the room that might just not fully understand what college sports is about and not fully understand that part of it is taking a loss to have all of these sports intact. And part of it is, saying we're not going to make money off volleyball, and that's just the way it is. But we have 25 or 20 athletes on that team that deserve a chance to play their sport at college. And that's what college sports is. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how this unfolds, because at face value, no matter how you split this money, it doesn't necessarily hurt anyone, or at least from the athlete's perspective. It doesn't necessarily hurt them by any means. It just pushes money in their direction. The question then becomes, if you're pushing a lot of money in football's direction and maybe you're getting some people involved like private equity, what would be the kind of conversation that happens 5 years from now if one of the volleyball program or the swimming program or whatever sport you want to throw out there, what if that is not making the money that they want and they're not getting the return on investment they want, and that's just kind of the way of the world and they want to get rid of it? I think that's the biggest worry for me. I think as of right now, there's not really a big issue with the way that it's split. Although that football is getting the vast majority of the money, it's not necessarily a problem until, some people in decision-making areas make it a problem. And frankly, I'll be totally honest, I'm not overly confident that it won't become one in the future. But the reality is, if this is handled, above board, if this is handled responsibly, if people understand that this isn't about, just making a lot of money, and this isn't about finding an opening in college athletics to go make a quick buck. This is about, putting all of these college athletes in the best position to live out one of their dreams and do something that, yeah, you're going to take a loss on and you're probably not going to make too much money on, but you are going to do something good. And that's kind of the world of college athletics. You got to sometimes, take a little bit of a monetary loss to do what's right by these student athletes. And there's definitely a worry for me that this isn't going to work out the way that I want it to. It isn't going to work out where the people in that room have that, care, I suppose, have that desire to keep all of these smaller programs moving. So it's definitely a worry. There's no two ways about that. I think all of us are just a little bit worried going forward about what the future holds with this new idea and revenue sharing and also possible private equity getting involved. But at face value, neither of those things are necessarily bad things. They push more money into college athletics, hypothetically, get more money in the hands of swimmers and volleyball players and softball players. Maybe not as much as they would like, but more than they have right now. Then the reality becomes, what do we do if these sports don't turn a little bit of a profit in 5 years? Are we keeping them around or are we cutting them loose? So it's kind of that fight between two things where you want to believe in, the goodness of the people making these decisions, and you want to believe that they fully understand what college sports is about, and it's not about making money, or it's not about, turning a profit in every single sport. It's about just doing right by the athletes, and it'll be really interesting to see kind of what happens across the country. It is more important now than ever before to have people in the room that fully understand that this isn't just about money, and this isn't just about, finding the best, stock, essentially, in the college sports industry. It's about finding, the special things about college sports, which in some ways is losing a little bit of money here and there to make these kids have the ability to live out their dreams. So it's a little bit of a kind of a double-edged sword where, as of right now, there's very few problems. If private equity gets involved, it's not necessarily a problem at face value. If 75% of this money goes to football, it's not necessarily a problem at face value, but it could be, definitely down the road. It could create problems down the road, and that's kind of what I'm most worried about. But if you have the right ADs in your building, if you have the right commissioners, if you have the right presidents and all of those people, I think you'll be okay. I think a lot of people will stay intact. I think a lot of sports will stay intact. And at the very least, we'll be able to look up in 5 years and college sports won't be entirely different. It'll be slightly different. I'm not going to lie to you there. But it won't be, sports just totally cut off and set adrift. So that's the ultimate goal. You obviously want all of these sports to continue on and be a big part of college sports going on. And that's going to take some decisions that are just kind of out of the kindness of their hearts, of these athletic directors, presidents, commissioners, what have you. So it'll be fascinating to watch, but we're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel. They had some very intense comments about this Ohio State roster and how it might just be the most talented they've ever seen. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the new split idea that came out about the revenue sharing house agreement that dropped about a month and a half, 2 months ago. They're trying to figure out how to split that among the athletic department, and it sounds like football is going to get a big chunk of the cake. So we'll break that down as it starts to come out more and more. But for right now, let's talk about Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel and the praise they had for this Ohio State roster. As we all know, Ohio State is rolling into this season with as much hype as ever, and where there is hype, there is a ton of pressure, and they are walking in with more pressure than anyone in the country. I think everyone understands that, frankly. And you worry about the O-line, you worry about some different areas of this team, but overall, I don't necessarily disagree with them. There's a ton of really good rosters out there, and especially this particular year, Ohio State takes the cake if you were to ask me. I think Georgia's right there, but as of right now, I can't find one better than Ohio State. But let's get to their comments and then get to this roster and kind of break it down for you guys. So it's a very interesting kind of way to look at it because Urban Meyer is a very, very complimentary person, let's put it. I think Zach Barnett over on Football Scoop put it so well. He called him superlative urban, where if he goes to a restaurant and doesn't say it's the greatest food he's ever had, you don't want to go there. It's bad food. But that is not necessarily the case for Jim Tressel. He's a little bit more reserved, a little bit more not as willing to give out his high praises to people. So while you might say, Urban's comments were, as of right now, he said, as of now, this is the most talented roster of the last decade, maybe ever. I mean, that's a big statement. They've got to play, but look at the quality athletes at every position. I've never seen anything like it. First of all, he is going to say that type of thing. He is that type of guy, but he's not necessarily wrong. This roster is just ridiculous top to bottom. It has about 3 levels of depth that you could play at any given moment. It's just absolutely insane. And then Jim Tressel said, I don't know if I've ever seen that many great players in that building all at once. Every position, every place you turn. So Jim Tressel was more talking about Ohio State in general as a program. And frankly, I totally agree with him there because I haven't necessarily been watching Ohio State for the entire history of their program, but I've been watching for quite some time, and no one is this 2024 team. There are really, really talented teams in the past for Ohio State. This one is just different on either side, on both sides of the ball. So it'll be really interesting to watch this team unfold, but let's start to break down this roster a little bit and give you an idea of why this isn't necessarily the most far-fetched thing in the world. So quarterback's the funniest one in the group because the talent is not at the top line. No disrespect to Will Howard, he's plenty talented himself, and Devin Brown is also a very good player, but the reality, when you look at this quarterback room and you're saying who is the most talented kid in this room, or let's say who has the biggest ceiling in this room, you go to Aaron Nolan and you go to Julian Sayin. Those are the guys that have the ability to absolutely light the world on fire, but currently they sit about 3-4 or 4-5 on the depth chart. So we have to wait a little bit for them. Not to say, Will Howard is plenty talented and I think will execute this offense really well. But when we talk about the quarterback room, the talent is a little bit younger than you like it to be right now. But the running back room is just absurd. TreVeyon Henderson, to me, is one of the best running backs in the entire country. I think as long as he's healthy, he has the ability to be the number 1 running back in next year's draft. Quinshon Judkins is one of the most pure, best pure runners I've seen in quite some time. I think he can just absolutely blow up in this offense. They also have James Peoples, who came in as a freshman, very talented kid. And then we'll talk about another guy that might just be making his way onto the running back rotation in the next segment. But the wide receiver room is always going to be a fun one, and Emeka Egbuka leads the way, but Brendan Ennis, Carnell Tate, Jaden Ballard, Jeremiah Smith, it's just insane what these guys can do at the wide receiver position. Also, if you're watching for a kind of low-key guy to watch, Kojo Antwi, I think, is going to be just incredible this year. Very athletic kid, can do a ton of really good things. Tight ends aren't necessarily the craziest thing in the world, but between Will Kamarack, the transfer from Ohio, G. Scott Jr., and Jelani Thurman, they're going to do just fine there. No problem there. O-line is a very interesting one because I think they're better than people give them credit for. I think they saw last year's team, and it wasn't necessarily that great on the offensive line, but they've only gotten better pretty much across the board. Donovan Smith is going to be one of the best guards in the entire country. I think Josh Simmons is going to be a much improved player, as is Josh Fryer on the other side at the tackle positions. And then when you add a guy like Chase McLaughlin from Bama, you're always going to be a little bit better at that center position. So definitely did a lot of really good work at the O-line. That's the other position that, if you look at it, under a microscope, you can find your little issues with it, but I think as a unit, they'll be more than fine. The D-line is maybe the best group of the bunch if you look across this team. Between Jack Sawyer, JTT, Talik Williams, Ty Hamilton, it's just an insane 4 across that front, and then they go about 2 or 3 deep, so it's just wild. The back end is probably just close to the defensive line, but it's just insane what they're going to be able to do against offensive lines this upcoming year. At the linebacker position, this might be the weakest group of the defense, but it's not weak by any means. Cody Simon's a really, really strong player. Sonny Styles, I have big expectations for, and CJ Hicks is a really, really solid player as well. I think Sonny Styles is going to be really interesting. He used to play safety, but with a lot of the things happening on that back end with so many different players back there, he made the move up to linebacker. He's also a little bit bigger of a guy, so it makes a little bit more sense. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I'm sure you are if you're a big-time college football fan, but DeMarvion Overshown was a safety at Texas when he came in, moved down to linebacker, and was just a torpedo for the rest of his career. Just absolutely flew off the ball, made some absolutely massive hits, and made his way into the NFL as a linebacker. And I expect the same thing from Sonny Styles. I think he's going to do just incredible things for this defense and just be a really hard hitter in the middle of that defense. And then the back end is the show. And it starts with Caleb Downs. Getting a guy like that on the screen right there from Alabama is like taking a supercharged Lamborghini and just adding rocket boosters to the back. It's insane what they're going to be able to do on the back end of that defense. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to pass consistently on this back end. You have Denzel Burke, who is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country, especially outside corners. Davison Igbinosun, I've talked about a time and again, I think would be cornerback one on pretty much any other roster in the entire country. Jordan Hancock and Lathan Ransom are just really, really good players, and they're probably third and fourth on this team in that position group, which is just insane. And then you have Jeremiah Matthews Jr. and Lorenzo Styles Jr. coming off the bench in the corner position. So it's just absurd what they're going to be able to do. They're going to be able to rotate in probably 8 or 9 different guys in a 5-man rotation and still be able to be effective start to finish. It's going to be absolutely insane to watch this team, especially on the back end. It's wild what they have on this team. So when you look at this team, it's outright insane. From the top level talent like Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, JTT, all of those guys, to the guys that I think are just going to be really, really incredible depth pieces like Davian Igbinosun, Sonny Styles. I think Seth McLaughlin's going to be huge for them this year. I think there's going to be a ton of wide receivers. Jaden Ballard, I think, is going to make some noise. Brendan Ennis, I think, is a hugely underrated guy. So when I look at this team, it's almost impossible to find a hole. You can, nitpick about Will Howard, but at the end of the day, that's a conference champion quarterback. That's a guy that led his team past a team that went to the national title that year. So I don't necessarily have too many questions. When you look at the offensive line, they've gotten better at every single position. Now, will it be the best offensive line in the country? Probably not. Almost definitely not, in fact. But the reality is, if you get just a little bit better, and Will Howard with his running ability adds a little bit to that offense, things get really interesting. So I don't necessarily disagree with what they were saying, especially what Jim Tressel was saying, because I personally have never seen an Ohio State roster that is like this, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think anyone can argue that. This defense is just absolutely absurd. But the offense, if you were to poke a hole, it would be at quarterback and offensive line, and I'm not nearly as worried about those as some other people are. I think Will Howard is going to add something to that offense that they missed a year ago with Kyle McCord. I think that running ability is going to make it really, really hard to defend him. And then the offensive line, I think it's just going to be better than they were a year ago. And they don't need to be leaps and bounds better. They just got to be a little bit better. So very, very much a big fan of this roster. I think in recent history, I didn't want to go all the way back to like 01 Miami and all of those teams, although that would be a good argument to have, to be fair. You also have 04 USC is a very interesting team to kind of have an argument here with. 2019 LSU, 2022 UGA, pretty much every single Bama team over the last decade. You could have a conversation about a number of other teams, but it would at the very least be a good conversation because this team from top to bottom, every single position with like 3 guys deep is just insane. If you wanted to poke holes, the offensive line is where you would do that, but I don't know, man. I don't really worry about that nearly as much as other people do because I think Donovan Jackson is a force. I think Seth McLaughlin's struggles at Bama were kind of a flash in the pan more than who he actually is. I think Josh Fryer and Josh Simmons are going to be just really, really good linchpins on the outside of that offensive line. So I don't necessarily worry about the issues that this team has. And if those are issues, having Donovan Jackson, one of the best guards in the country, as at a position where it's an issue, I think you'll be okay. Let's just be honest. So I don't know if they're going to win the title. Frankly, I saw someone a couple of days ago, maybe it was yesterday, say, what will the excuse be if they don't win a national title? You should never need an excuse for not winning a national title. It's really hard. That's, I guess, an excuse, but the reality is winning a national title is really hard. If they lose to Michigan, then we're having a conversation. I'll give you that. But if they do win a title, if they do, do all that stuff, it'll be partly because of the talent of this roster. If they fall short, it won't be because of lack of talent. I can promise you that. So they have plenty of dudes. They got to make sure that they make something happen this year, because the pressure is huge on this team, and it just got added just a little bit by some of the predecessors for Ryan Day, but that's the reality of the sport. When you have a roster like that, you're going to get expectations, and Ryan Day really has expectations with the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this unfolds, but when you look up and down that Ohio State roster, it's kind of hard to argue with Urban and Jim on this one, I'll be totally honest with you. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about two-way players. Travis Hunter took the world by storm last year when he was just incredible all year. But there's a couple other guys that I want to talk about that might just be looking that direction. So I want to break down those guys, and then a couple other guys that I'd love to see play both ways right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Ohio State and how Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel had some very, very nice things to say about the talent on this roster, and I don't necessarily disagree with them too much. There's definitely some argument to be had, but it's ridiculous, the talent that is on that roster this year. But let's jump into some two-way players. This is a huge year for two-way players, it seems, with a lot of guys kind of eyeing that direction. Travis Hunter was obviously last year a really special player to watch. He was a guy that could pick someone off on defense and then flip right around, have 4 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown drive on the next one. So it's just insane what he was able to do, and it sounds like it's spreading just a little bit. There have been some people that have made their intentions known, or at least their desire known, to play both ways, and Caleb Downs is the most recent one. He was one of the biggest transfers of this past cycle. Going from Alabama to Ohio State was definitely a huge pickup for the Buckeyes, and he was going to play safety. He likely is going to play safety, but he wants to play running back, it sounds. It sounds like that was part of his recruitment when he was coming in, was, we'll give you that opportunity, and he wanted to do it. He had, I think, about 600 yards rushing his senior year of high school. Obviously, you don't want to put a guy like that in too much danger his senior year, but the reality is the athleticism is there. There's no two ways about that. Will Johnson was the other guy that we had talked about possibly trying to do this. Definitely will be interesting to watch, but this is the guy that started it all. Travis Hunter last year was just electric. He did absolutely everything on the football field for them. They played about 150 snaps a game or something crazy. And it is insane that he was able to do that. That is not a normal thing. He is not a normal human, to be totally honest with you. This guy is a different type of athlete, and even guys like Caleb Downs and Will Johnson, who are among the best athletes in the entire country, they're not Travis Hunter, I'll be totally honest. This guy is just different in every possible way. But let's get to Caleb Downs and talk about what his coaches had to say about it. Ryan Day did not rule out the idea of him possibly moving over to running back in 2024. He is participating in position meetings leading up to fall camp, so it'll be really interesting. Ryan Day said it was a part of recruiting him during that portal period where we'll give you that chance to possibly get on the field as a running back, and it's going to be really weird to watch that happen because this is something that's kind of been happening a little bit more, but we could just be seeing Caleb Downs getting a handoff from Will Howard at some point this year. And I, for one, am really conflicted about that idea. So I talked about it last week when we talked about Will Johnson, where I really like the idea of guys playing both ways. It's a very, very fun thing. It shows you who the just elite athletes among elite athletes are in college football. It shows you the guys that have the ability to play both ways, have the, stamina, which is just absurd in and of itself, to play both ways, and it's a really, really fun thing to see. Let's just be totally honest. Some of us turned on Colorado games even when we didn't much care because that guy was playing, because he is just absolutely incredible. So Caleb Downs has that athletic ability. He is absolutely insane, can do just remarkable things on the football field, but the reality is this doesn't make much sense from a football perspective. This running back room, as we just talked about, is just absurd. Between, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and a guy like James Peoples coming in as a freshman, there's no football reason that you would need Caleb Downs to be running the ball. All that being said, I don't much care. I really want to see this guy on the offensive side of the football, to be totally honest. I think Caleb Downs has a chance to be a top 5 draft pick in 2026. He can do just remarkable things. He would be a first-round pick if he left this year, if he was able to leave this year. But the reality is he's going to be a safety at the next level. It probably wouldn't be the best idea to put him back at running back and possibly risk him getting injured and dropping his draft stock just a little bit. I still want to see this happen very badly, and I want to do it for a number of different reasons. But the main one is there have been a number of seasons, at least from my point of view, maybe some other people have some other opinions about this, but there have been a number of seasons where the best player in the country, or at least a player that deserves to get an invite to New York, was left off that list or didn't win the Heisman because they're a defensive player, and offense is what people care about. It's usually just who's the quarterback of the best offense in the country that wins a lot of games. Throw them the trophy, and that's the end of the day. But sometimes there are better players in college football. And sometimes those players don't show up on stat sheets quite as much, although Caleb Downs does his best to do it. I just think if this is what needs to happen to get some defensive players the recognition that they likely deserve as just ridiculous athletes and maybe the best player on the team, I'd make the argument that Caleb Downs is the best player on Ohio State. I think JTT would have an argument there, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and Emeka Egbuka, but I would make the argument that this is the kid. And I think Caleb Downs doesn't necessarily need to be on the field. There's no football reason for it, but at the end of the day, if he just comes in on goal line plays and just racks up touchdowns because he is an absolute bowling ball of a kid, I would have no problem with that. I think it would be a very, very fun thing to watch. And frankly, if it means that Caleb Downs, who I have said time and again is, in my opinion, the best player in the country, if it means he gets recognized that way, I'm all good. That sounds fine with me. But obviously, don't want to put him in harm's way by any means. I don't necessarily expect this to happen, but I like the energy nonetheless. But I do want to get to a couple other players that I think I would love to see possibly make that leap to the next, or make that leap to be a two-way player. I think that's something that I'd love to see kind of across the country just a little bit more, but I had a couple of guys that I wanted to break down. Obviously, we talked about Will Johnson. That's definitely someone that not only is it someone that I'd love to see play wide receiver just because of the athletic ability, Michigan might need him at wide receiver. They don't necessarily have a ton of proven guys, and if you need a spark plug at some point, I would not be surprised. I would be less surprised if Will Johnson made the jump than Caleb Downs just because of the need at the position. But it'll be really interesting to see what he does. I'm very, very excited to see if he possibly makes his way over to the offensive side. But the other guy we talked about yesterday, Nick Harbor, is one of the best athlete in the country. I'm going to say that with my chest at this point because this dude is absolutely insane. Was going to the Olympic trials for track, but decided to stay back, is back with the Gamecock football team, and he's going to do incredible things this year, but he's going to do them probably at wide receiver, almost exclusively at wide receiver, but at some point, I would love to see this kid at edge and wide receiver. If I could turn off injuries and fatigue and just let this kid play, I would. And it's likely something I will do on College Football 25 when it comes out because this kid is just really, really fun. Edge rusher is not necessarily a position where you can flip back and forth too much and play a ton of snaps, but the reality is I would love to see this kid on the field as much as possible, and it would be awesome to see if he could possibly pull it off, be an edge rusher and then turn right around and catch a 60-yard pass downfield. So it would be awesome to watch that. That kid's athleticism is just ridiculous, to be totally honest. excuse me, I misordered these a little bit, but Malachi Starks is the next one. He's someone that genuinely, I think you could put him anywhere on the field and he would make an impact. I think you could snap him the ball in Wildcat and he would make something happen with his legs. The dude just is an outright football player. He does things on the football field that make my jaw drop. If you watch that Oregon game and you saw that catch, I'm sure it made your jaw drop. The dude has ball skills that might be the best in the country in terms of safeties and just can do really remarkable things. So absolutely love this kid. I think if you put him at wide receiver, just throw up a jump ball and let him go get it because he's going to go get it. The dude is just absolutely incredible and definitely someone I would love to see play both ways at some point. Probably won't happen. He's going to be, one of the top, probably the top safety off the board next year, but I would love to see it nonetheless. Then you have Abdul Carter, a guy that, honestly, this is a personal favorite. I think this would just be really, really cool. He's obviously not necessarily running back size. He is definitely bigger than that. And he is definitely not necessarily going to be a guy that you're going to put in just normally, but a goal line package with Abdul Carter would be something to watch. I'll just put it that way. Definitely something that I would love to see, and it would just be incredible because this dude's athleticism speaks for itself, but seeing him just absolutely pound the rock into the goal line would just be awesome to watch. I'll be totally honest with you. So that one's definitely not going to happen. I'll put my chest behind that one, but I would absolutely love to see it. And then the final one is also fan fiction, but Tyler Booker is one of the best athletes on the entire offensive line of really any offensive line across the entire country. This guy is just ridiculously athletic for an offensive guard and can absolutely move people. So flip him around, make him a nose tackle, and he'll move people. I can almost promise you that. The guy is absolutely incredible, elite athlete. I think he could play really any position across the offensive line and maybe across the defensive line too. The dude is absolutely insane, so would love to see it. It's not going to happen, I'll be totally honest with you, but Caleb Downs is one that is really interesting because he has the ability to be that two-way player. There's no two ways about that. He absolutely can be the guy that makes noise on the defensive side of the ball and then comes in periodically to play running back. I just don't see the necessary need for him to do that for Ohio State. I think Nick Harbor would be incredible to watch. Carter, Starks, and Tyler Booker, we're not going to see on the other side of the ball, just be totally honest with you guys, but that would be incredible nonetheless. I don't know if this is going to be the year of the two-way player, but I think this is kind of a sign of what's to come, sort of. I think there's going to be more and more players that are going to start pushing for this. They see what Travis Hunter is capable of doing and say, I'm capable of doing that. I want to do that. So I would not be surprised at all if people started pushing themselves a little bit more in that direction, and it'll be really interesting to see. So some of these players, I think, you likely won't see Caleb Downs on the offensive side of the ball too much. Maybe it's a package here and there. Maybe the same thing for Will Johnson. Travis Hunter's going to do his thing. I'm not worried about him. But I don't necessarily think there's, Travis Hunter type guys all over the place. I think there's incredible athletes, but Travis Hunter is a different type of athlete. So I would love to see it. I'll be totally honest. This is something that I very much wanted to see for quite some time in college football. So would love to see some of these guys make that leap. But in terms of actual what it makes in terms of football sense, I don't necessarily see it too much for any of the guys. But at the end of the day, I don't much care. I just want to see these guys on the football field. So would love to see that. Definitely would be an interesting thing to watch. But as of right now, we have the best two-way player that I've ever seen in Travis Hunter. So you got to love that. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to get back to our stock up, stock down segment. We're going to get into the Big 12 today and break down two teams that I feel really good about going into the next 3 to 5 years, and then teams I feel not so good about when we're going into the next 3 to 5 years. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about two-way players and how they might just be becoming more and more of a thing in college football, and I am all for it. I love the athletes in the sport, and I think there's a number across the country that could possibly make it work on both sides of the ball. So we'll definitely be watching out for that this upcoming season. But let's get into the stock up, stock down segment we've been doing over the past couple of days. We've done the SEC, we've done the Big Ten, now we're over to the Big 12, and there is a really, really tough conference to get a beat on because there's a lot of things changing. Everyone's kind of in a lot of the same boat, right? A lot of people are just fighting to get to the top of this conference, assert their dominance over it, and hopefully, hold that for quite some time in this new Big 12. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold, but I have a couple of teams that I'm watching particularly closely. To me, Utah is Utah. I'm not going to touch them because that stock is very comfortable where it's at. I don't think it's moving any which way. Colorado also, far too variable for me to even get remotely close to Colorado on this one. So we'll start to break down some other teams, but the team that stands out the most to me in this is Kansas is on the way up. I feel very confident in that, and I think Kansas, we've kind of conditioned ourselves into believing this is only a basketball school. They can only get out for basketball. That's not the case. I can almost promise you that. Lance Leipold has brought something to this program that just wasn't there before. There's an energy around this fan base. There's a care around this fan base for that football program that just wasn't there, and that tends to happen when you start to win games. But I do think it's going to be really, really incredible to watch this team kind of unfold. I think there have been players coming out of this program over the last couple of years that just used to not come out of Kansas. Austin Booker is probably the best example from this past year, was drafted, I believe, in the second or third round to the Bears and was a very, very good player at Kansas, a fantastic edge rusher and someone that Lance Leipold has a lot to do with why he's in the NFL today. So I think they could be a huge portal destination with the head coaching with the head coach that they have there. I think they could be a really, really interesting place to watch going forward. Also, I think this fan base is crazy. I understand it's mostly basketball, and that's always going to be the case. It's like Georgia's always going to be a football school. There's certain places that Kentucky's always going to be a basketball school, no matter how much Mark Stoops wins. That's just the way of the world. But it doesn't mean this fan base won't get out for these games. It doesn't mean this fan base won't get excited and won't get loud, because when game day came there, I think a couple of years ago when they were 5-0, that town was crazy. You could feel it through the game day set. You could feel it through your TV, and it was really incredible to watch. And I think that's just the reality of college sports. Crazy fan bases are crazy fan bases, whether they're, cheering on basketball or football. So they just need to give them something to cheer about. And Lance Leipold has finally done that. So I think the talent level is really, really high in this team. I think they have the ability to compete with some teams that they just wouldn't 5 years ago. I think with that guy up right there, I think they have the ability to do really anything they put their mind to. He can absolutely win a Big 12 championship. He can absolutely get to the playoff, and he can absolutely go into someone else's building and win a game. There's no doubt in my mind. Also, well, if he wins the Big 12, he wouldn't have to do that. But even if he does have to do that, I think this is a guy that could totally just confuse a defense for an afternoon and steal a win for the Gamecocks. So I love this team in 2024, but also I just love Lance Leipold and what he's doing over there. He's building a program that not only is getting better year over year, but is sustainably getting better. He's not doing flash in the pans. He's not trying to get a ton of portal kids to just go all in one year. He's making sure that everything is built the right way and have a foundation where even if they do stumble one year, they can get right back up and have a great year the next one. So very much like the Gamecocks, I think they absolutely, Jayhawks, excuse me. I don't know why I felt like I said Gamecocks that entire thing. It's Jayhawks. I apologize to the Kansas fan base, but I really do like them. I think they're going to be really interesting going into this new era of the Big 12. The other team that I'm watching is Texas Tech. I think this has a ton to do with the head coach as well. Joey McGuire, I might be being, I might be gullible to the energy that he has when he walks in the locker room, but the reality is this guy has what Texas Tech needs, and it's unadulterated confidence. That program has an ability to do really, really incredible things. You look back in the Mike Leach era there, they did some really remarkable things. They were not only a team that you had to worry about in the Big 12, but they were a team that you had to worry about nationally. They were a top 10 team for a vast majority of the time that he was there, and it was just incredible to watch some of those teams play. So this program has that ability. They just need the right head guy in charge, and frankly, I think they have it in Joey McGuire. I think he definitely did have a tough year when there was a lot of momentum going into the last year, but I think this year is actually a much better team, much better situation for them to have that big-time year than last year was. I think when you look at this team, the recruiting is different. I'll be totally honest. They brought in the only 5-star in the entire class for the entirety of the Big 12 last year with Micah Hudson. So they're going to do things on the recruiting trail that some others just won't. They have the ability, they have the reach, they have the head coach that will fly overnight to one place and then overnight to another. He will be working literally 24/7, 365. The guy is not going to rest until he gets Texas Tech where he wants to be. And frankly, I think they just need a spark. They need a thing that kind of gets them galvanized, gets them going, and really puts a lot of energy behind this program. Frankly, I thought it was going to be when they beat Texas his first year. It didn't really end up being that. But there's plenty of other places to get that spark moment and kind of move this program into where you want it to be. So it'll be really interesting to watch. I think Texas Tech is one of those programs that they've been a little bit dormant for quite some time, where just not necessarily winning a ton of games, being an 8-win team, a 7-win team, sometimes a 9-win team, but never really cracking that top echelon. This is the time to do it. The talent level is really high. I think the Big 12 is absolutely wide open, and Texas Tech is one of the teams that absolutely can dominate the Big 12 going forward, and it could just happen this year and start this year and not end for quite some time. But I really like the Texas Tech Red Raiders as we go into the next kind of era of college football, and that's the reason why. I really love Joey McGuire. I think he has the right energy to get this program where it needs to be. But let's get to stock down, and I want to start with Baylor. Baylor is one of those that is kind of circumstantial, the way that we talked about the Big Ten and the SEC. There's going to be some teams that just fall in the pecking order by nature. That's just the way it's going to work. Utah and Arizona are coming into this conference ahead of Baylor. That's just the way it is. Now, all of that could change, and also Colorado and Arizona State, I don't necessarily think are walking in definitely ahead of Baylor. They absolutely could be at the end of the year, no doubt about that, but I do think that Baylor's just heading in a little bit of the wrong direction. I really like Dave Aranda. What he did the first couple of years he was there was very incredible, and I think he's a very capable head coach, but when I look at their roster compared to others around the Big 12, it just doesn't match up very well. I think Daquan Finn is a fantastic player. I think he's going to be one of those guys that really makes this fan base and a lot of people fall in love with him across the country. I think he's going to really make some plays for them, but I don't know if it'll matter too much in this conference because there's going to be so many close games. Everyone's going to be so closely contested that you're not going to be able to just ride one guy to victory. And it feels like that's what Baylor's going to kind of have to do going into this season. But at the end of the day, Dave Aranda is going to be able to put together a good defense. As long as he has a base level talent that is, higher than it was a year ago, frankly, I think they're going to be able to play good defense. So they could survive in this world and could be a dangerous team where they're going to beat you, 21-17, and you're going to hate your time every time you go to Waco. But I don't know. I don't feel great about where their talent level is at. I don't feel great about all of the people coming in that might just be slotted above them, and especially with a team like Colorado that might just, hit the jackpot at some point and shoot up towards the top of this conference. It's just not an ideal situation for Baylor to be in. And the next one is going to be very interesting. I'll be totally honest with you. The TCU Horned Frogs, I don't feel great about. I know that just 2 years ago they were playing for a national title, and I know it sounds crazy for me to say that they are going to be continuing on downhill over the next couple of years, but my issue more lies with the way that they're building this roster. I love Sonny Dykes. I think he did something that I didn't even know was possible, frankly, in his first year at TCU. Did a ton of remarkable things, but since then, it's been a really rotating cast of characters, and a lot of people are doing that across the country. It's not to say that TCU is the only person doing that. It's not to say that TCU can't succeed doing that, but it is to say TCU isn't Ole Miss. They're not Oregon. They're not some of these other teams that are bringing in a lot of transfer portal guys, but they're bringing in the top line guys. They're bringing in guys that have started at other programs and have done really good things at other programs. TCU's bringing in guys that are really good players in their own right, but aren't necessarily at the level that they need them to be, are going to be a little bit further down the line in the pecking order of the recruiting in the transfer portal world. So I like TCU. I think they're a team that is a little bit dangerous at times, and I think especially with Sonny Dykes, where he's going to be able to score points the majority of the time, they have a chance to add some variability to this conference and be kind of an interesting team, but I think there's too many things stacked against them. It's not even just the Big 12. SMU is in the ACC, but they're going to give them a ton of trouble. SMU, I saw a stat a couple of days ago, and frankly, I'll probably bring it up tomorrow when we're talking about SMU in this segment, but they raised over $160 million last year, and it's because they moved to a power conference. That was all that SMU was waiting for. All of their alums were waiting with their pocketbooks ready, but they weren't giving it to an AAC team, but they were giving it to an ACC team. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. I think between them, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, LSU, OU, all of those guys in Dallas are getting calls from all of those universities. TCU is just not going to be able to match up. I'll be totally honest. I would love for them to be able to match up, but for the vast majority of these kids, it's not going to be an easy thing for TCU to do. So I think they can be dangerous. I think they can play really good offense. I think Sonny Dykes has that ability to open up a team where, 2 years ago, we did not think that team was going to do what they did, and he was able to pull it off. So they have a path to being a player in this conference. I just think there's too many rungs of the ladder they have to climb to get there. So I'm a little bit worried about this team overall, but overall, this conference is the most interesting in the entire country. It could go any which way this upcoming year, but also the next 5 years could go any which way. We could have a team totally assert dominance. We could have a rotating cast of characters come in and out of this conference. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. We could even have Utah not even be a part of this conference in a couple of years. So a lot of stuff will happen around this conference, but I absolutely love it. Josh Pate has called it America's Conference. I could not agree more. It's absolutely beautiful in every possible way. So love this conference, but let's move on to Hot Take Thursday. We're going to take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into a hot take that I have about the scheduling of college football and how I think they might just be able to take a page out of college basketball's book to make this more interesting, more intriguing, and just add a fun little week to the college football schedule. So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the stock up, stock down teams that I'm looking at in the Big 12. Definitely some teams that I feel pretty good about going into the next couple of years, and some teams that I think just might start to slip as the Big 12 kind of expands and gets a little bit more different over the next couple of years. So that'll be really interesting to watch, but let's get into a Hot Take Thursday. And frankly, I don't know how hot of a take this is. I don't know if people are really in favor of this. I don't know if people absolutely hate this idea. But I think conference challenges would be a very good thing for college football. I would absolutely love to see them, and there's a million reasons that I'd like to see them, but I'll kind of get into them one at a time here. And I think one of the biggest reasons is uniform scheduling in the sport just has to be a thing, especially if you're getting into a world where you have at-large bids and you have bids that are a little bit different. You have to compare totally different resumes to each other. The reality is you need a way to kind of give a moniker to these teams. You need a way to make sure these teams kind of understand that you can't lose, 3 games in the SEC and always benefit. You can't lose 1 game in the Big 10 or Big 12, and always benefit. There has to be some type of moniker to get us to be able to show who's the best team, who's the worst team, how did these teams match up to each other conference to conference. And this is the best way for me to, at least the way that I think about it, this is the best way to go about this. I think they would create a ton of really fun out-of-conference games. You could even do them on week 2 and just make week 2 its standalone, incredible week of college football, all out-of-conference games around the Power Five, just incredible matchups pretty much across the board, and kind of try to get a little bit of what Rivalry Weekend has, where you wake up that day and you know every single moment of college football is going to be fun, it's going to be crazy, and it's going to have a little bit of fire. I think this would have that same type of atmosphere, not necessarily to the level of a Rivalry Weekend, but I think it would be incredible to have a weekend that you have week 1 to kind of get you into the college football season. And it kind of gets the juices flowing. You get a little bit better at TV switching. I fully understand the routine in week 1, but week 2, I'm ready to let it roll. I'm ready to let it ride and kind of get these teams out on the field, and I want to see great matchups. We had Ohio State, Virginia Tech way back in the day. Ohio State lost one of those games. That's the benefit of having some of these games, is there's going to be some weird things that happen. Kansas State and Missouri was a great matchup the last couple of years, where you were kind of 2 teams that were kind of in the same spot of their conference, where they were fighting kind of in the middle, wanted to get to the top, and it was really, really good games 2 years in a row. I think Kansas State won 1 and Missouri won the one last year. So it's going to be incredible if we get to see more and more of these games. And the way that I think it would work would frankly be really simple, if I'm being totally honest. One of the other reasons I do want this to happen, I want to get out in front of this, is I need people on Twitter to stop telling me that the SEC is weak, or that the Big 10 is top-heavy, or that the Big 12 isn't a good conference, or the ACC is trash. I'm sick of that. I want to hear it on the football field. I want to figure this out on the football field, so random people on Twitter without a profile picture can stop telling me that the SEC is just top-heavy and isn't actually a good conference. But that's beside the point. That's a little rant that I wanted to go on real quick. But let's get into what this would look like. And it's pretty simple. It would look like the way it looks in college basketball, right? This would start hypothetically in 2025, let's just say, and you would have the SEC would play the ACC, and the Big 10 would play the Big 12, because, frankly, I think there's more good ties in between those two. Rivalry games would not be included, so I don't want Georgia Tech and Georgia to be included in this. I don't want South Carolina Clemson included in this. I want these teams to be number 1 against number 1 from last year. So I want Georgia against Clemson, or Georgia against Florida State from the year before, because that's a cool matchup. That would be an electric matchup, a matchup that we haven't seen in a really long time. Frankly, I can't remember the last time that Georgia played Florida State. So it'll be really fascinating to see some of the matchups that we would get, and I think week 2 would just be the perfect time to do it. You get that buffer in week 1. You get that buffer before conference championship, before conference games start, and you would have that ability to have that big time game that gets you ready for the season, that gets you hyped, that everything is kind of like a conference game week where you're going through everything very intently and wanting to win this game. And it's a great resume builder as well, because if you're matching up teams based on, based on difficulty, and you're making sure that these guys are matched based on their rank, and it's not, Georgia playing Georgia Tech and very lopsided matchups essentially, then at least you're having, you have a moniker to go by. Say, if Purdue beat, I'm trying to think of a good one. If Purdue beat Syracuse, that's kind of the equivalent to a matchup of, Texas playing Clemson or something like that. It's a loose example, but the reality is it would add more of these really cool games. It would add more games that we don't see, like Miami against Rutgers. When was the last time that you guys remember really caring about a Miami-Rutgers game? But it could happen in the future, and I think there's a number of games we can point to in the past that have been these fantastic atmospheres and fantastic games. The one tweak that I would make to the system that we have in place in around out-of-conference games is no out-of-conference game should be in any other building than a college football stadium. That's shouldn't even be a question if I'm being totally honest. But at the end of the day, I don't want to see a game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I want to see Clemson and Georgia play in Sanford Stadium and Memorial Stadium. I don't want to see Florida State and LSU play in Camping World. I want to see them play at Tallahassee, and I don't want to see them play in Mercedes-Benz Superdome. I want to see them play in Baton Rouge, in Death Valley. So that's the big thing here is they got to be home games. They got to be away games. And the issue with that is you might have some teams that play 2 home games in a row or 2 away games in a row, which is logistics that I have yet to figure out. I will do a full-length segment where I really flesh this out, but the reality is I think it would add a really, really fun week to out-of-conference play. And I think for the most part, out-of-conference play, it has its games. There's no two ways about that, but I don't know if you guys fall into the same trap during week 1, 2, and 3 where you have about one game that's really, really good in every slot, and that's great, and that's awesome, and I'm absolutely watching that game, but I am someone that wants all the football in the world. I'm being a little greedy here, of course, but I want, one weekend before we get into conference games where I can say, I'm going to turn on 3 TVs. We're going to have all the TVs going every single game. It's going to be incredible, and there's going to be so many games to watch, and I think this would be a great way to do that. Now, there's going to be some teams that are left out every year where the SEC and the Big Ten would have more people in their conference. Actually, the ACC has more than the SEC, but there would be odd people out nonetheless. Those people could schedule another Power 5 team in another week. They could schedule Oregon State and Washington State if they wanted to for the time being. A number of different things could happen there to kind of even and balance the scales a little bit, but at the end of the day, this would just be a really, really fun way to go about college football where you don't know what the matchup is going to be. And that's the biggest thing here is I don't want to know what a game that's going to be played in 2037 is. I don't care. I don't want to know that UCLA is facing off against Syracuse in 2029. It does not matter to me. Release all the schedules in the spring, maybe around March. Release all the schedules for the upcoming season and include this in it because it's very, very easy to do. It would get the people very excited as the season kind of rolled on, would maybe create some rivalries around some teams that are roughly around the same area in the conferences every year. There would be juice around this weekend, and frankly, I just need a little bit more from my out-of-conference games. No disrespect to the out-of-conference games we have, because we have a lot of really good ones this year, but first of all, they're not happening in the right place, and I'm being a little bit greedy, but there's not enough of them. I want every single good game you can possibly give me. I think it would give us really fun new matchups to look at, fan bases that we might, kind of write off right now might be remarkable in some of these games. There might be some really incredible things that happen from these games, and maybe we have an upset or two here and there. So I just think this is an idea that, it helps uniform scheduling. It makes for some really fun games like UGA against Florida State, and then the next year UGA against Utah, or Ohio State against Kansas State, and then the next year they face Miami. Because you could do it in a way where the average finish of an SEC team, the average finish of a Big Ten team, Big 12, and ACC, you'd rank those 1 through 4. The 1 would play the 4, the 2 would play the 3, and then it would rotate every single year. Now, maybe you get the same matchups every single year, who knows, but I think there would be some variability between the top 2 and the bottom 2, and I think it would be a really, really fun thing to watch. So I think it would be incredible. I'll be totally honest. I understand how people might not be a huge fan of this, but more than anything in this entire argument is, one, I want to figure out who's the best conference so people on Twitter can stop acting like they know who the best conference is. And then 2, I don't want to know games that are coming a decade in advance. I don't care about those games, and I want games that I turn on my TV in the middle of March, right before or a little bit before the season starts, and say, oh shoot, we're playing Florida State this upcoming year, or we're playing Kansas State this upcoming year, whatever it is. I think that's fun. I think that would be an incredible thing for college football and would add some majesty to that weekend. It would make an entire other weekend, other than rivalry weekend, it would have its own moniker. It would be cross-conference weekend. It would be 2 battles. It would just be incredible. I'm fully on board for this, and I understand if people aren't. I understand if people are a little bit hesitant to this with, the tradition and all of that for college football, but I think it's just a step in the right direction in a number of different categories, whether it's uniform scheduling or just getting better games on out-of-conference games and just getting more around the early parts of the college football season. So big fan of that. I think it would be a very, very cool thing to see. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. I don't necessarily know if this idea has been kicked. It's probably been kicked around a time or two, but it sounds like it's not necessarily gaining too much traction. But if I have anything to say about it, this will be a part of the future of college football. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really, really good work across every single sport you could possibly want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.